You know, when we think about the biggest health risks out there, our minds usually jump straight to specific diseases. We're sort of trained to think about our health in terms of a diagnosis we might get. We spend a lot of time and energy worrying about our hearts, right? And of course, we're taught to be incredibly vigilant about the risk of cancer. And we keep a close eye on our metabolic health, worried about conditions like diabetes. But here's the thing. For adults over the age of 60, one of the most dangerous, life-changing events they can face, well, it isn't a diagnosis at all. It's a fall. And this is absolutely the crucial point. A fall is rarely just a random, clumsy accident. It's a signal. It's the moment that suddenly exposes an underlying fragility, a loss of physical capacity that's been happening quietly, maybe for years. Okay, so let's really get into this. Let's look at the stark reality of what a major fall, something like a hip fracture, actually means for an older adult. Because it's not just an injury, it's a profound turning point. And this number, well, it's pretty sobering. Some long-term estimates suggest that the 15-year mortality risk for an adult over 60 after they break a hip could be as high as 50%. Now, the exact figures vary from study to study, but that pattern is consistent and it is alarming. So here's what you have to understand. A hip fracture is almost never an isolated event that someone just fully bounces back from. It's a catalyst. It's the event that kicks off what is often a long, steady decline in their health, their independence, and their overall quality of life. It literally changes a person's trajectory. Okay, so if most falls aren't just random accidents, then what's really going on? Let's break down the mechanics here and reframe falling for what it actually is. A predictable failure of our body's physical systems. See, we fall for very specific, very measurable reasons. Our balance gets worse if we don't actively work on it. Our reaction speed slows down, which means we can't get a hand or a foot out in time to catch ourselves. Our foot speed and our power disappears, so even if we do react, the movement is just too slow to help. And this last one is critical. Our eccentric strength. That's the ability to absorb force, to decelerate, it weakens. That means even if you get your foot down in the right place, you just don't have the strength in your leg to stop the collapse. And that right there is the core concept. Falling isn't about being clumsy. It's about a measurable loss of physical capacity. Your body just doesn't have the resources anymore to stop itself from hitting the ground. This brings us to some really remarkable data, information that often gets overlooked in our typical health conversations, but it points to what might be a far more powerful predictor of how long we live. Look, we're all taught correctly to be afraid of smoking. It's one of the most famous risk factors for an early death. But what if I told you that in massive studies with hundreds of thousands of people, there's something else that's an even stronger predictor of who lives and who dies? Let's just look at the data. This chart shows the increased risk of death. Smoking bumps up your mortality risk by about 30 to 40%. That's significant. But having low cardiorespiratory fitness, what we measure as low VO₂ max, can increase your risk of dying several times over. It's not a little bit worse, it's multiples worse, and it dramatically outpaces a lot of those traditional risk factors we hear so much about. So what is this critical thing, VO₂ max? The easiest way to think about it is this. It's the size of your physiological engine. It's your body's maximum ability to pull in oxygen and then use it to create energy. A bigger engine just means that everyday tasks take up a smaller percentage of your total horsepower, so life just feels easier. And as that engine gets smaller over time, it leads us toward a very specific and very critical threshold, a point where our independence, our very autonomy, is fundamentally at risk. The problem is that this decline is slow, it's quiet, and it is relentless. For most people who aren't actively training their cardiovascular system, their VO₂ max starts to drop around age 40. At a rate of roughly 1% per year. It's so gradual, you don't even notice it's happening, until one day you do. And that day often comes when you cross this threshold, something researchers call the line of independence. It's the point where your physiological engine has gotten so small that the most basic tasks of daily life, things like getting dressed or walking across a room, suddenly require a near maximal effort. And research gives us pretty specific numbers for this. For men, that line is a VO₂ max of around 18. For women, it's a bit lower, around 15 to 16. Once you dip below these numbers, just living your normal daily life becomes physiologically extreme. Climbing a single flight of stairs can feel like you're in an all-out sprint. And this is where things can get really dangerous. Once a person crosses that line of independence, a really devastating negative feedback loop can kick in. It's a cascade, both physiologically and behaviorally, that just accelerates the decline. Let me just walk you through this spiral. First, because every single activity feels exhausting, you start doing less. You stop going for those walks. Well, this drop in activity causes your strength and fitness to fall even further. That, in turn, often leads to social isolation because it's just too much of an effort to go out and see people. And with less strength, less fitness, and less time spent moving, your risk of a fall just skyrockets. It's a vicious cycle where atrophy just leads to more atrophy. So, how do we stop this from happening? I mean, we can't stop aging, but we can fundamentally change the slope of that decline. The solution is all about a proactive strategy. It's about building a buffer. And this quote just captures the mindset perfectly. The objective is not to live forever. It's to build such a high level of physical capacity that the inevitable declines that come with aging, well, they just don't push you below that line of independence. It's all about creating a margin for error, a margin of safety. Because look, life happens. You might get injured, you might have to have surgery, or go through a period of intense stress at work. If you have a high level of fitness, a big buffer, those events might cause a temporary dip, sure, but you won't fall off the cliff into dependency. You have the reserve capacity to bend without breaking. So the real takeaway here is this. We don't just die from a specific disease. We often die from the slow, relentless loss of our physical capacity, where a fall is simply the final, predictable event in a long, quiet process of decline. And that leaves us with this final thought. Your physical independence isn't guaranteed. It's not a permanent state you just arrive at. It is something that has to be actively earned and maintained every single day. So the real question is, what are you doing to maintain yours?